We think schools teach children to succeed. But what if they're designed to teach compliance instead? Most people believe education creates opportunities. Parents work multiple jobs to afford good schools. Students stress over grades and college applications. Teachers dedicate their lives to helping kids learn. This seems logical because we're told education is the great equalizer. But there's a small detail that doesn't quite fit. Why do the outcomes seem so predictable? Children from wealthy families generally succeed, regardless of how well they perform academically. Children from poor families generally struggle even when they're exceptionally bright. If education truly leveled the playing field, we'd see more randomness in outcomes. Instead, we see patterns that mirror the existing class structure almost perfectly. The actual system works differently than advertised. Schools don't just teach subjects, they teach behaviors. And the behaviors they teach depend on which type of student they're serving. For wealthy children, school functions as a networking laboratory. These kids learn to question authority, negotiate with teachers, and view themselves as future leaders. When a rich kid challenges a teacher's decision, it's called critical thinking and leadership potential. The system encourages this because these children are being prepared to manage others. For poor children, school operates as a compliance training facility. These kids learn to follow instructions without question, accept authority without challenge, and view themselves as future employees. When a poor kid challenges a teacher's decision, it's called disruptive behavior and attitude problems. The system discourages this because these children are being prepared to be managed by others. Think about your own school experience for a moment. Which category did your teachers treat you as? This explains something curious about classroom management. In wealthy districts, teachers use phrases like, "What do you think about this?" and "How would you solve this problem?" In poor districts, teachers use phrases like, "Sit down," "Be quiet," and "Follow directions." Same profession, same training, but completely different methods depending on the audience. The difference isn't accidental. It's institutional design. By the way, if this kind of analysis interests you, subscribe to Prof. John Explained for more content that examines these hidden patterns. Wealthy schools emphasize creativity, critical thinking, and self-direction. They have art programs, debate teams, and student government. They encourage students to question, explore, and take intellectual risks. These schools are preparing future executives who need to make decisions and lead organizations. Poor schools emphasize discipline, routine, and following instructions. They have metal detectors, strict dress codes, and zero-tolerance policies. They encourage students to comply, conform, and avoid mistakes. These schools are preparing future workers who need to take orders and follow procedures. The testing system reinforces this division. Wealthy kids take tests that measure creativity and analytical thinking. Poor kids take tests that measure compliance and basic competency. The wealthy kids learn to think outside the box. The poor kids learn to stay inside the lines. But here's where it gets interesting. The teachers and administrators genuinely believe they're helping all students succeed. They're not consciously discriminating or trying to limit anyone's potential. They're responding to institutional pressures and social expectations that are largely invisible. Wealthy districts receive community pressure to challenge students and prepare them for leadership roles. Parents demand advanced courses, creative programs, and opportunities for their children to excel. These parents have the social capital to influence school policies and push back against anything they perceive as limiting their children's potential. Poor districts receive community pressure to maintain order and prepare students for employment. Parents demand safe schools, basic skills, and opportunities for their children to avoid trouble. These parents often lack the social capital to influence school policies and must accept whatever programs the system provides. The result is two completely different educational experiences, masquerading as the same system. But both communities believe their approach is correct, and both have rational reasons for their priorities. This creates what we might call the compliance gradient. As you move from wealthy districts to poor districts, schools become progressively more focused on obedience and less focused on independent thinking. The curriculum doesn't just change. The entire purpose of education shifts. The compliance training starts early. Elementary schools in poor areas emphasize sitting still, raising hands, and waiting for permission. Elementary schools in wealthy areas emphasize exploration, collaboration, and taking initiative. By third grade, these children are already being sorted into different behavioral patterns. But the sorting mechanism goes deeper than most people realize. Consider how standardized testing actually functions. In wealthy schools, students are taught test-taking strategies. given extensive preparation time, and encouraged to view tests as challenges to overcome. The entire culture treats testing as a game to be mastered. In poor schools, students are drilled on basic content, given minimal preparation time, and taught to view tests as judgments of their worth. The entire culture treats testing as an evaluation to be feared. This creates different psychological relationships with evaluation itself. Wealthy kids learn that assessment is something they can influence and improve through strategy and preparation. Poor kids learn that assessment is something that happens to them, revealing their inherent limitations. The sorting continues through high school. Wealthy teens learn to see authority figures as resources to be leveraged. They're taught to network with teachers, negotiate for better grades, and view school as a system they can influence. Poor teens learn to see authority figures as obstacles to be avoided. They're taught to keep their heads down, avoid attention, and view school as a system that controls them. Consider how discipline works. When wealthy students break rules, schools typically respond with counseling, parent conferences, and alternative solutions. The assumption is that these are good kids who made mistakes and need guidance to get back on track. When poor students break rules, schools typically respond with suspensions, detention, and punitive measures. The assumption is that these are problem kids who need consequences to learn proper behavior. Which type of discipline did you experience when you made mistakes in school? The wealthy kids learn that mistakes are opportunities for growth and negotiation. The poor kids learn that mistakes are evidence of character flaws requiring punishment. These are fundamentally different lessons about how the world works and how to navigate authority structures. The college admissions process reveals the full scope of this system. Wealthy students are coached to present themselves as unique individuals with special talents and leadership experience. They're taught to view admissions officers as potential advocates who can be persuaded to offer opportunities. Poor students are taught to present themselves as hardworking and grateful recipients who hope to be chosen despite their disadvantages. They're taught to view admissions officers as judges who evaluate worthiness based on strict criteria. Same process, completely different psychological framework. The wealthy kids approach college as consumers purchasing a service. The poor kids approach college as supplicants requesting charity. But there's something even more sophisticated happening here. The system has created what we might call aspiration management. Poor students are encouraged to dream big, but within very specific parameters. They can aspire to be doctors, lawyers, or engineers. But they're steered toward becoming employees in these fields, not owners or leaders. Meanwhile, wealthy students are taught to think about systems and ownership from an early age. They don't just learn about businesses in economics class, they learn about starting businesses, acquiring businesses, and structuring businesses for maximum advantage. This continues into the workplace. Employees from wealthy backgrounds typically negotiate salaries, request promotions, and view their careers as investments they're actively managing. They understand that advancement often requires strategic relationship building and calculated risk-taking. Employees from poor backgrounds typically accept whatever salary they're offered, wait to be promoted, and view their careers as jobs they're lucky to have. They understand that security requires following rules and avoiding conflict with management. These aren't personality differences, they're programmed responses created by years of institutional conditioning. The compliance factory trains different psychological reflexes into different populations, creating a self-sustaining workforce hierarchy. Consider how each group responds to workplace authority. Wealthy background employees typically see bosses as colleagues to collaborate with, problems to solve together, or obstacles to work around strategically. They've been trained to view authority as negotiable and themselves as future authorities. Poor background employees typically see bosses as authorities to respect, rules to follow, or threats to avoid. They've been trained to view authority as permanent and themselves as permanent subordinates. The compliance factory produced exactly the workforce it was designed to create. Wealthy graduates become managers, entrepreneurs, and decision makers. Poor graduates become workers, service providers, and order followers. The system maintains itself by teaching each group the behaviors appropriate for their intended role in the economic hierarchy. But there's another layer that makes this system particularly effective. The tracking happens so early that most people never realize they were sorted. By the time students graduate, their programmed behaviors feel like natural personality traits rather than institutional products. A wealthy graduate doesn't think, I was trained to negotiate with authority. They think, I'm naturally confident and ambitious. A poor graduate doesn't think, I was trained to defer to authority. They think, I'm naturally humble and respectful. This psychological sleight of hand prevents people from recognizing the system that shaped them. Instead of questioning why they behave certain ways around authority, they assume their behaviors reflect their inherent character. How do you typically respond when your boss asks you to do something you disagree with? The compliance aspect remains invisible because it's embedded in the structure rather than stated as policy. No school explicitly says we're training poor kids to be obedient workers. Instead, they say we're preparing students for success while implementing practices that produce very different outcomes for different populations. The genius of the system lies in its deniability. Every component can be justified with educational language. Strict discipline becomes creating a safe learning environment. Limited creative opportunities become focusing on essential skills. Reduced critical thinking becomes building strong fundamentals. Meanwhile, the opposite approaches in wealthy schools receive equally reasonable justifications. Flexible rules become encouraging independence. Extensive creative programs become developing well-rounded students. Emphasis on critical thinking becomes preparing future leaders. The system even has built-in explanations for why outcomes vary. But when wealthy students succeed, it's attributed to their hard work and natural ability. When poor students struggle, it's attributed to their lack of motivation or family problems. The structural differences in how these students were treated throughout their education remain unexamined. Its explanatory framework protects the system from scrutiny. If poor students underperform, the problem must be with the students or their families, never with the institutional design that trained them to be passive rather than assertive. But let's examine how the tracking system actually works in practice. It begins with something as simple as reading groups in elementary school. Teachers divide students into different groups based on perceived ability levels. The advanced readers get challenging books and complex discussions. The struggling readers get simple books and basic comprehension questions. What's remarkable is how quickly these groups become self-fulfilling prophecies. Students in advanced groups begin to see themselves as smart and capable. Students in struggling groups begin to see themselves as limited and in need of extra help. By 5th grade, these identities are largely fixed. The grouping continues throughout middle and high school with track classes, ability groupings, and program placements. Students in honors tracks learn to expect intellectual challenges and leadership opportunities. Students in regular tracks learn to expect structured guidance and clear instructions. Teachers often unconsciously adjust their expectations and teaching styles to match the perceived needs of each group. Honor students get Socratic seminars and independent projects. Regular students get lecture-based instruction and worksheets. Even the physical environment reinforces these divisions. Honors classrooms often have flexible seating arrangements, group work areas, and displays of student creativity. Regular classrooms typically have rows of desks facing forward, clear rules posted on walls, and displays emphasizing compliance with expectations. The differences extend beyond academics into social dynamics. Wealthy students are encouraged to form study groups, collaborate on projects, and see their peers as potential networking connections. Poor students are often discouraged from socializing during class and taught to view their peers as distractions or competition. This is why educational reform movements consistently fail to eliminate inequality. They focus on surface-level changes, better books, newer technology, increased funding, while leaving the fundamental compliance structure intact. Poor schools get better equipment, but continue teaching obedience. Wealthy schools get better equipment and continue teaching leadership. Reform advocates genuinely want to help, but they're operating within the same conceptual framework that created the problem. They assume all students should receive the same type of education, when the system is actually designed to provide different types of education to different populations. And even teacher training reinforces these patterns. Education programs teach future teachers about classroom management techniques that vary significantly based on the demographics they're expected to serve. Teachers heading to poor schools learn about establishing clear rules, maintaining order, and using consequences to shape behavior. Teachers heading to wealthy schools learn about facilitating discussions, encouraging creativity, and building relationships with students. The compliance factory doesn't just sort students by academic ability. It sorts them by psychological disposition, creating entire populations of people who have internalized their role in the economic hierarchy. The poor believe they should follow orders because that's what they were trained to do. The wealthy believe they should give orders because that's what they were trained to do. Both groups see this as natural rather than manufactured, which is precisely what makes the system so stable and effective. The compliance training feels like education. The psychological programming feels like personal development. The social sorting feels like meritocracy. And perhaps most remarkably, both groups remain convinced that they live in a meritocracy where education provides equal opportunity for all. The compliance factory has successfully hidden its true function even from the people it operates on, leaving everyone believing they participated in an educational system rather than a sorting mechanism designed to reproduce the existing class structure. The system operates in plain sight while remaining functionally invisible to the people it processes. Everyone involved genuinely believes they're participating in education when they're actually participating in social engineering. The factory continues running because no one realizes it's a factory at all. But perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of this system is how it maintains the illusion of choice. Parents believe they're choosing the best education for their children. Students believe they're working toward their dreams. Teachers believe they're helping young minds develop. Yet the choices available within each social class are carefully constrained. Wealthy parents can choose between elite private schools, magnet programs, or high-performing suburban districts. But all of these options emphasize leadership development and critical thinking. Poor parents can choose between underfunded public schools, charter schools with strict discipline policies, or vocational programs. But all of these options emphasize compliance and basic skills. The menu of choices creates a feeling of agency while ensuring that everyone ends up in their predetermined role. You can choose your path, but all paths lead to the same destination based on your starting point. This illusion of choice serves another function. It prevents people from questioning the system itself. If you believe you had choices and made decisions, then your outcome feels like the result of your preferences rather than institutional design. You chose a school that emphasized discipline because you valued structure, not because that was the only type of school available in your neighborhood. The compliance factory has perfected the art of invisible coercion. It sorts people into different tracks while making everyone feel like they chose their track. It reproduces class structure while maintaining the appearance of meritocracy. It operates as a social control mechanism while presenting itself as an opportunity system. Consider how extracurricular activities function within this framework. In wealthy schools, students are encouraged to start their own clubs, take leadership roles, and view activities as opportunities to develop their personal brand. The message is clear: you are someone who creates opportunities and shapes environments. In poor schools, students are encouraged to join existing programs, follow established structures, and view activities as privileges that can be revoked for poor behavior. The message is equally clear: you are someone who fits into existing systems and follows established rules. Even something as basic as parent-teacher conferences operates differently across class lines. In wealthy schools, these conferences often resemble business meetings where parents and teachers collaborate as equals to develop strategies for the student's success. Parents ask questions, make suggestions, and sometimes challenge the school's approach. In poor schools, these conferences often resemble performance reviews where teachers inform parents about their child's behavior and academic standing. Parents are expected to listen, agree with assessments, and promise to reinforce the school's expectations at home. The language used in these interactions reveals the underlying power dynamics. Wealthy parents hear phrases like, "Let's work together," and "What are your thoughts on this approach?" Poor parents hear phrases like, "Your child needs to, and you must ensure that at home." This extends to how academic struggling is addressed. When a wealthy student falls behind, schools typically respond with additional resources, specialized tutoring, or alternative learning approaches. The assumption is that this intelligent child simply needs different support to succeed. When a poor student falls behind, schools typically respond with remedial programs, basic skills repetition, or behavioral interventions. The assumption is that this child lacks fundamental capabilities and needs intensive drilling to meet minimum standards. The psychological impact of these different approaches shapes how students view their own potential and relationship with learning. Wealthy students learn that struggles are temporary problems to be solved with resources and creativity. Poor students learn that struggles are evidence of their limitations that require extra effort to overcome. And the remarkable thing is that it works so well that even pointing out its existence feels like a conspiracy theory. The system is so normalized, so taken for granted, that questioning its basic assumptions sounds radical or paranoid. Looking back now, Can you see which track the system placed you on? Hit subscribe if you want more analysis that reveals the mechanisms operating behind everyday systems, and share this with someone who might be ready to see their education experience in a completely different light.